Well, hello everyone and welcome to this video, which is all about the Australian Music Exam Board's Piano for Leisure Series 4. And this is with me, the syllabus consultant, Tim Topham. So I'm a specialist in creativity and music education, and I've got a real passion for helping classically trained teachers to rekindle their creative side and develop this in their students through engaging, motivational and inspiring teaching. I host the Creative Piano Teaching Podcast. I blog at timtopham.com, speak at local and international conferences, including the MTNA in the United States, Music Expo in London, the NCKP in Chicago, and MTAC in California. Lots of acronyms there. I've been featured in journals like the American Music Teacher, the Piano Teacher magazine here in Australia, and California Music Teacher, to name just a few. And it was my pleasure to put together the Piano for Leisure Series 4. And as syllabus consultant, what that means is I get the fantastic job of choosing all the music for the books. And so in this video, I want to take you through some background information for the series, some of the things that go into putting a series like this together. I'd never done this before, and so this was a completely new experience for me. So I want to share some of those things that I learned with you, so you've got a better background and idea about how series like this are put together. We'll also talk about the performance notes, which if you've been using Piano for Leisure books in the past or any of the AMEB books in the past, you'll notice that in this new series, there is a very different take on the performance notes. So I'm going to show you and explain that. And also, in subsequent videos, I'm going to play through the music from each of the new books and talk through some of the teaching ideas, some of the things to look out for, and what the examiners are looking for, and also talking through and demonstrating some of the creative strategies around each of the pieces as well, which are all linked into the performance notes. So what were the goals of this series? As the syllabus consultant, what I really wanted to do was ensure that these books were full of appealing music for young and old. One of the things we definitely don't want to have happen when we're teaching is to require parents to consistently buy new books because there's only one or two good pieces in a book. So I really wanted to do my best to compile books that involve lots and lots of great music that students will enjoy. All the music contains a variety of styles and genres, and I'll talk a little bit more about the different genres in each of the collections. And they need to have pedagogical merit. If any of you have seen any of my other videos or listened to my podcast, you could probably guess that I could have filled many, many books with lots of great fun, Tim's cool piano music books, and maybe I will still do in the future. But for this is an examination series. Students have been tested on this material, so we needed to ensure that the pieces all had pedagogical merit, which means that there are teaching points in each of them, and the teaching points are sequenced up through each of the grades, so they're not jumping around too much, and the teachers have a clear mandate for what they need to get across in each piece. I also wanted to provide teaching tips for you. If you're like me, you will probably have shelves at home that are just overstocked with music already. There's probably music on your floor, there's probably music on top of the piano, under the piano, in the garage, gathering dust in boxes. We all have so much music. And while, yes, this is a new series of books, and I think it's great to have some fresh music in there, I wanted to provide more than just music. And so with the performance notes, I'm actually giving you some teaching tips and strategies, which I hope you can apply to just about any piece of music that you choose to teach in the future. And as you'll see in a moment, the books are packed full of creativity ideas, little suggestions of things that you can do with your students to unpack the pieces and pull them apart a little bit and muck around with them, have some fun, do some improvising, get creative, encourage your students to make up some music, and that side of things is just so important these days, that we help our students with creativity. So this is me probably 2 years ago now from when I'm recording this at Hal Leonard headquarters, and each of the crates in front of me, I don't even know how many books. There would have been 200 in each or something. There was about 8 of these crates for me to go through. I did the same thing at some other warehouses around Australia as well, just trying to choose and find some new repertoire. If there was some new things out there that I wasn't aware of. I already had, as I mentioned, shelves stocked full of music, and I have always been a person passionate about finding new music for my students and sharing it with them as much as possible. So there was absolutely no shortage of music. And unlike perhaps bassoon or oboe or recorder teachers, us piano teachers, we've got so much choice of music. The hardest thing is finding out the real gems in there. So what was the biggest challenge, do you think? If you had this job that I did of choosing all this music and putting them into books, what was the biggest challenge? Well, for me, it was leveling. It was about working out what piece should go in what grade. And so I have to say that now that I've actually done this job and seen how difficult it is, I certainly will never ever again complain about someone else's leveling, because I've done it. I'm sure many of you out there who are watching this have done it as well. We all do it from time to time. We'll say, oh, why is this in grade 3? This should be in grade 2, and this isn't A+A. This is like a certificate of performance, and this is definitely a preliminary. Why is it in grade 4? All of these, well, hopefully not that bad. All of these things are really, really common when it comes to putting together a series and then using it. So I've done my absolute best, and I have to give great credit to my reviewer, Julie Spithill from New South Wales, and also the review panel. So certainly all of these choices went through more people than just me. I had a great team to help me with this. But I will certainly say, if you've ever tried leveling pieces into a series, then yes, you'll realize that it's a really big challenge. So let me go through 11 quick considerations, the things that I had to keep in mind as I was putting the series together. So the first one was fun. I definitely wanted the music to be engaging, to capture students' imagination. So lots of music has great titles that are evocative of a mood, or just the music itself is fun to play, or sounds really evocative of a filmscape or a soundscape and things like that. So as engaging as possible was really important. For genre, each book contains music in 4 genres. So there's pop music, there's classical, there's jazz, and there's what I'd call contemporary solos. So music like Robert Vandals and Dennis Alexander, those sorts of composers, just modern composers producing great solo music for piano students. So in each book, you'll find those 4 genres covered. In each book, there's 12 pieces. So that means there's 3 of each type in each book. And so with that, I'm hoping for 2 things. One is to obviously make the books as valuable as possible for students so they can get the most value out of buying just one book. And secondly, so that with one book, if you choose to, you'll be able to present a mixed recital at the examination. I mentioned pedagogy before. Pedagogical interest is obviously very, very important in producing a series like this. Obviously, the teaching points need to be clear. They need to be well sequenced and effectively laid out. And so, a lot of music these days produced by some composers are very formulaic, particularly with the left hand. And so you'll hear lots of lots of music with fifths in the left hand, and also lots of music with these kinds of patterns. And there's nothing wrong with either of those 2 things, but what I had to ensure in the series was that there was a mix. So if there were pieces that used those compositional devices, which students love and are great to play, that there was a mix of those and other challenges, particularly in the left hand. So trying to engage the left hand with melody and melodic ideas, crossing over hands, those kinds of things as well. We needed to keep in mind that the key needed to be associated with the grade level appropriately. So you'll find that in pretty much all of level 1, which is preliminary to grade 4, the keys of the pieces will align very closely with the keys required for the technical work of the grade. After that, in level 2, things get a little bit more mixed up, and you'll see there is a piece, for example, in about grade 6 or 7, which is in F sharp major, so lots of sharps. And I've chosen that because it's good to show students that there are other ways of doing things, that they're not always going to be keys with only 1 or 2 sharps or flats. But it does, pieces that I've chosen fit under the hand really, really well and are very, very fun to play. I also had to consider the meter. So all the music that students listen to today, pretty much without exception, is in 4/4. And 4/4 is great, but we want our students to be able to understand that there's alternatives. There's 3/4, there's 6/8. There's also alternate meters too. And so even in preliminary level, you'll see a piece in 5/8 come up very, very quickly. And I think that's really important that students are engaged in different meters. Being an Australian exam system, I wanted to ensure that we included as much Australian music and arrangers as possible. And so each book features at least 2, 3, sometimes 4, either compositions or arrangements by Australians. Many of whom, by the way, haven't been featured in any published works before, which is really cool. I also wanted to make sure there was a mix between arrangements and originals. So in popular music, most of us will know that a lot of the arrangements we find online are either ridiculously difficult and kind of unplayable, or they're too simplified to actually sound like the original. So finding a balance there was important. I was also conscious that I didn't want to only have arrangements of classical pieces too. There's so many great classical tunes out there, and the books feature a number of the famous operatic arias and things like that, and they're great, but I also wanted to include some genuine classical music written by the actual composers that haven't been arranged in each book, and so you'll find a variety of pieces that cover that area. I also wanted to make sure that the pieces all had lasting merit, and this is particularly problematic with pop music. And so while it would be great to have filled the book when I first started this, which was at the end of 2016, with a whole lot of great pop music from 2016, a lot of it would be out of fashion now, and students wouldn't even know it. So anytime I've chosen popular music, for example, Bruce Hornsby, The Way It Is, and others, including film tunes and stage show musicals, musical themes. All of those are ones that have already stood the test of time, and so I know will continue to do so in the future. Duration was another consideration. We need to make sure that obviously the pieces don't go too long. The examiners only have a very, very limited amount of time, particularly at the lower grades. It's something like 10 minutes or something in preliminary to do all the music pieces, technical work, sight reading, oral tests, general knowledge. Like it's amazingly tight amount of time. So we had to keep that in mind when choosing these pieces. Another thing about a lot of music today is that it tends to be very much melody in the right hand, accompaniment pattern in the left hand. And again, that's totally fine, but I needed to keep a balance of that to make sure that everything wasn't in that format. And so if I grab just all the music that's produced today, I'd say sort of 70-80% would be in that area. So we needed to make sure that we're using things that had melodic ideas in the left hand and balance between chord and accompaniment between the two hands as well. And finally, one of the most frustrating things when you're putting together a series of books like this is that sometimes the pieces have already been used in previous books and they can't be used again. So you'll see, if you're familiar with the manual lists for the AMEB, you'll see I've chosen some pieces that haven't been in a book and pulled them into the manual list. Others are fresh, completely unknown, and there'll be some that perhaps you've seen way back many years ago if you've been teaching for a long time. But generally, I've tried to keep it as fresh as possible. So what makes this series different? Well, it all comes back to my approach of asking ourselves, what do students actually need from their lessons with us? We all know that they need technique. They need a good, solid technique. They need to understand how to read music and explore a variety of genres and activities too, on and off the bench, tapping, rhythm clapping, singing. All of these things contribute to a well-rounded education. I also am very passionate about finding activities that connect with students and are relevant. There is great evidence to suggest now that students will learn much more quickly if they can make connections to material that's already in their head or already experienced in their world. And so if we can find those connections, we're going to have even more success in our studios. I'm also very passionate about creating activities for students that create teach a deeper understanding of the music that they're learning. And by that, I mean not just being able to play what's written on the page, but hopefully have an understanding of how it's actually been constructed. I found this great quote by Christina Lee on Facebook recently. It said this: "Here is a big reason why students want to quit piano. They want to quit piano because they don't understand how music works." And I think this is so very true. But the question is, how do we help our students understand how music works? Well, I look at it this way. You may have seen this if you've seen me present or give webinars before. The building blocks of music I divide into 3 sections, and it's underpinned by chords and progressions. To me, chords and progressions, so harmony, is the foundation of all our tonal music. And while some people may disagree, I put rhythm as sitting on top of a harmonic foundation. And I've had some good, robust discussions with percussionists and drummers about rhythm being the absolute foundation of music, and some piano teachers too, for that matter. However, my feeling is that rhythm on its own with no music isn't music. So we need that harmony for it to become music, and so that's why I put the harmony first and then rhythm sitting on the top. And then on the very top of that sits melody. So that's kind of how I picture it in my mind. Where do we tend to start all our piano teaching? Where in the pyramid? Well, we tend to start at the top. We teach students to read starting at middle C or thereabouts, and then we slowly, as they understand more about music, we increase the complexity of the rhythms that they're learning about. And then finally, we might touch on chords and progressions. Maybe our method book will cover it, and we'll talk about it then. Quite oftentimes, we won't cover this area at all, and the biggest reason for that is that we weren't taught about it ourselves very much. And to me, this part of the pyramid is the foundation. It's the most fundamental, and so it's the one that I think students can benefit the most from learning about. Unfortunately, without that part of the pyramid, students can be a little bit lost because all they'll know about is the rhythm and the melody. So this takes us to performance notes. The new notes in this series are split into 4 different topics. So for those of you who are familiar with previous books, you'll know that the books tended to have at the end the performance notes. Right at the back of the book, there'd be a paragraph with some discussion about some practice tips and performance suggestions. The new notes feature these 4 topics, and they appear now on each page of music. So at the end of each sheet of music, you'll find these performance notes. So I'll either talk about elements and challenges in the piece, I'll give some notes for the student, notes for the teacher, or some creative practice ideas. And depending on the piece of music, I'll cover generally 1 or 2 of these 4 elements, but not all of them for each piece. The creative ideas are the thing I'm most passionate about. They give you some ideas of things you can do to extend your students and explore the music a little bit more deeply with them. My goal is that it will help develop your students' curiosity, which is a fantastic trait for students to have, and it's often one that's missing when students are focused much more on reading, performance, and interpretation. Developing curiosity means that students will start to listen more to what's going on around them, to the music that they're actually listening to, and start asking themselves questions about why do they like it? Could they actually try and play it? Could they sing it and then try and play their melody? Could they try and play the bass line and work out what the chords are? These are things that I love engendering in students. They do feature these creative ideas that I mentioned in the performance notes, do feature improvising and creating music from scratch, all based on the music that they're learning though. And so what that does is really deepens their understanding of the piece of music. Do keep in mind that these creative ideas are not for use in exams. So please, the music is to be presented to the examiner as written, with the standard interpretation and flourishes and whatever else. But these creative ideas are not for the exams. So let's take a look at an example. I'm going to play you now this piece of music by Christopher Norton. It's called Full of Confidence, and it's from his Connections series. Here's how it goes. So for this piece, in the creative notes, I've suggested the following. This is the perfect piece for exploring some basic jazz improvisation just for fun. Using the notes of the C blues scale, which I've listed on the page, encourage the students to improvise a new section at the end of bar 8, repeating the opening bars in the left hand and improvising with the right hand. So what this basically is suggesting is that because the left hand repeats, and because the right hand melody is composed solely of notes from the C blues scale, there's nothing stopping you encouraging your student to try some improvising using the notes of that scale while you play the left hand that repeats over and over. So what I suggest teachers do is just start, for students if they've never done this before, and perhaps the teacher, you have never done this either, start with just the first 2 or 3 notes of the C blues scale. So get the students used to playing C, E flat and F. And encourage them to play any of those 3 notes while you play the left hand. So it'll sound something like this. Depending on the student's level, ability, age, all sorts of different things, they'll be able to groove along with that quite effectively. It might be very, very simple. The student might be very, very timid. And all that means is that they just need a little bit more guidance, perhaps some demonstration. So maybe you could keep the left hand going and you could demonstrate a couple of things that you could do in the right hand and then ask them to have a go. So it's more like a call and response. As the student gets more confident, they can play more notes of the C blues scale so that they end up using all of the notes while, again, you play that left hand for them. And with magic, basically, students are suddenly improvising and making up music of their own from nothing, except a really cool bass line that Christopher Norton created for us. So what students can now do is play the first 8 bars or so as written, and then at the end of the 8th bar, instead of going on to bar 9, just start again the left hand only, and then do an improvised solo. And then at bar 9, go back to the music to finish it off. It's actually what jazz musicians effectively do. They play the head or the start of their piece as written, and then they improvise, and then they come back to the head to finish. So here's how it might sound when a student performs it. Again, not for their exam, but if they're playing for a school recital or an assembly or something like that, they could definitely do it in this kind of a format. Here's how it might sound. And so you heard the little bit of improvising that I did for about 8 bars, and then I went back to bar 9 as written. Now for students, if you're going to try this out with them, just make sure that when you do start working on this C blues scale, you play the left hand while they're grooving along. The step that I just leaped to then is something that would happen after a number of weeks. It takes quite a while for a student to be able to improvise something rhythmically independent in the right hand while keeping that left hand walking bass line consistent. So do that for them, at least at the start. That's how you're going to have real wins with them. And then eventually they'll hopefully be able to put both parts together. So my outcomes that I hope you'll be able to get from these is obviously they'll be fun and creative for both you and your student. It's definitely going to deepen their understanding of the music that they're listening to. A student who now is playing that Christopher Norton piece now knows that Christopher has created it by using all the notes of the blues scale. And that could be a useful exercise for when they play future jazz and blues. I'm also hoping that if you do choose to explore some of these creative ideas, it's going to increase your own teaching skills and it's going to spark some of your own ideas of what you could do with some other pieces of music. For example, there's nothing stopping you when there's a repeating bass line in a different kind of piece to do some improvising in that piece as well. And I'll show you some of those other options when I demonstrate the music. I think too, having a deeper understanding, pulling pieces apart, improvising, getting creative with them, ultimately develops better performances in the end because students have a more innate understanding about the music that they're playing. So while the examiner might not hear all that groovy improvising, they're going to hear a really finely polished performance because the student, well, they've played something far harder than what they'll actually be doing in the exam anyway. So hopefully they'll be creating better performances, better informed performances, and certainly some really great interpretation because they've gone much more deeply into it. So before we go to the next video and I start exploring the music with you, I just thought I'd let you know where to find me online. So I'm at timtopham.com. And if you'd like to check out the blog or the podcast, that's where to find it. And here's what my homepage looks like. And I'll just point out the webinars link on that page. And the webinars link will take you to a whole lot of free online training that I have. So it's a little bit like this. It's you watching me at the piano demonstrate something. We have videos about how I teach beginners with no books for up to 10 weeks, studio marketing, how to create and update your studio website. We've got my 4-chord composing course, how to teach the blues and jazz, all of those kinds of things. We've got free trainings on those. You can sign up at any stage. Just click that webinars link. And if you are a listener of the podcast, I know many people out there do listen to it. You can find this in the iTunes store or in your usual podcast app. But I also have an app. So if this style of teaching sounds kind of cool, sounds interesting, and you'd like to find out more, then just head to your local app store and search for Tim Topham, Tim space Topham, and you'll be able to download my app. That will give you full access to my blog, podcast, videos, and social whenever it comes out. And I will just mention too that I have a piano teaching community online called the InnerCircle, which is where I create all my full courses, lesson plans, download, teaching resources, and we have these amazing community forums with a whole lot of experts that I've invited in to join us. So if that's of interest, again, head to the website and you'll see a link for the members area there. All right, let's go on to our next video, which is all about exploring preliminary.